I'm Dan, and this is Dan Explains. A few weeks ago, I did a video on terraforming the moon. The other world in our solar system that seems closest in form to the moon is the planet Mercury. Except, it's way closer to the sun and hotter than the moon, because Mercury receives 5 to 10 times the solar energy in a given area than the Earth and the moon do. However, I think it could still be terraformed anyway. Let me explain why. First off, let me preface this video with this. I'm not going to discuss the details of how you would get the resources to the planet Mercury. I'm just going to assume you use the same method you might for the moon or other small worlds. Maybe by doing something like smacking the planet with a Kuiper belt object to give it the needed volatiles and an atmosphere to provide a good starting point for terraforming. Also, this video leans heavily on my lunar terraforming video. So I recommend you go watch that one before this one. You'll be totally lost if you don't. That being said, let's get into it. In spite of its small size, the moon is a really good spot to be terraformed. Exactly the same distance from the sun as the Earth. So it should be pretty easy to keep the surface temperatures from running away and getting too hot like Venus, or too cold like the planet Mars. Mercury, on the other hand, is blazing hot, because it receives about 10,000 watts per square meter compared to the Earth and Moon's 1,400 watts per square meter. In spite of its place as the smallest major planet in the solar system, Mercury is dense, which gives it gravity that almost exactly matches that of the planet Mars. However, using a method to retain its atmosphere, similar to the one I described in my video about the Moon, would still need to be used, because Mercury's escape velocity is still pretty low. But the method would need to be heavily modified, mainly for two reasons. Firstly, the reason I already pointed out. The amount of sunlight it receives is the highest in the solar system. Secondly, it's the closest planet to the sun, meaning the solar wind would more aggressively try to strip away any atmosphere you try to put on it. One issue many people like to point out is Mercury's slow 59-day rotation, which is about twice as long as the Moon's 29-day rotation. This probably wouldn't be that big of a deal, however. Both Mercury and the Moon would have what's called super-rotating atmospheres, which would quickly carry the heat from the sun-facing side to the night side. Venus has a super-rotating atmosphere, and in spite of the fact that it has the slowest rotation of all the planets of the solar system, it has one of the most even day-night temperature gradients. And no, it doesn't have gale force winds on its surface either. So, the slow rotation wouldn't be too much of an issue for thermal equilibrium. The main modifications that would be needed to make floating organisms I described in my lunar video sustain Mercury's atmosphere and temperature would be to make them photosynthesize nearly the whole entire light spectrum coming from the sun. Other than that, the life cycle could be very similar. This would create a sunshade over the entire planet. The organism's photosynthetic rate could be fine-tuned using temperature-dependent enzymes, so they absorb less light when they're cooler and more light when they're hotter. So they would act like a thermostat, keeping the atmosphere in a desirable temperature range. Another important aspect is that they would have to be completely transparent to infrared light. Otherwise, the heat from the sun and the organisms themselves would get trapped, causing a runaway greenhouse effect. This is exactly the reason why Venus is so hot, even though the atmosphere is so thick that only a fraction of sunlight reaches its surface. The organisms would probably have enough mass that the solar wind would have difficulty stripping them away. However, something more would probably be needed to prevent the sun's radiation from destroying them. There may be a trick to give the planet a protective magnetic field. As many of you probably are already aware, it's the conductive metals moving inside Earth that give it its protective magnetic field. I don't have time to go over the math in this short video, but if you made the organisms scavenge conductive metals when they're in their water phase of life, they could take advantage of the super-rotating nature of the atmosphere to create a magnetic field around the planet. Although the total amount of metal circling the planet would be much smaller than we have on Earth, the speed would be faster due to the super-rotating nature of the atmosphere. So maybe one day in the future, one of your great-great-great-great grandkids will be relaxing on a Mercurian beach sipping their favorite chilled beverage. Thank you for watching. If you like this video and other topics ranging from theology to science, please press the like button, subscribe to my channel, and ding the bell to get notified when I post new videos. Also, please support me on Patreon to get extra content and special perks. Link in the description. The more people support me, the more time I can dedicate to making videos like this one. So, until next time, have a great week.